Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Today, I wanted to address the subject of race once again, this time from a slightly different perspective. I am going to put on my eyeglasses and read two things. First, something that I wrote, and second, a statement written by somebody else. I really admire this other person, and I will give you that person's name when I finish reading what that person wrote. It is about race and about Jews, in particular, about so-called white Jews, and why the concept of white Jews needs to go away. It is harmful. I, as I have said many times before, reject being called white. But let me go ahead and read you the passage I wrote, followed by reading you the statement by this other individual. Here's what I wrote. If Palestinians are people of color, then why not I? Therefore, I stand side by side with my brown Palestinian sisters and brothers. I have indeed regarded myself as a person of color, a brown person, for many years. By the same token, I recognize that I benefit from white privilege. A failure to acknowledge that privilege, however much I despise it, would, in my view, be immoral. That places me, and I think Ashkenazim and Sephardim in general, in a precarious position. After all, race is socially constructed, which we will come back to in just a bit. To explain those two terms, there are many different branches of Jewry, meaning after 70 AD, after the diaspora, when Jews dispersed, they dispersed all over the world. In the US, the majority of Jews are either Ashkenazi or Sephardi. Ashkenazim, the plural, refers to Jews from a Middle European background. Sephardim refers to Jews from a Spanish background. Most American Jews are Ashkenazi, not Sephardi. So hopefully that clarifies that one thing. Now, I will read you a quotation, a wonderful quotation, written by a person whose name I will most likely botch. If it were written in Hebrew, I could read it, but when it's transliterated or Romanized into English, I can't. And so most likely I will not pronounce it correctly, but I will try. Danny Ishai Bihan. That's the best I can do. Here's what that person wrote. My bottom line remains intact. Ashkenazi Jews and all ethnic Jews able to pass as white, which includes me, are people of color, and unless one excludes Middle Easterners as a whole from this tent, there is no conceivable case for singling out Jews that does not ultimately rest on anti-Semitic theories or double standards. One claim I've encountered it too, is that quote unquote white Jews identifying as anything other than white lessens the gravity of discrimination against people of color. This complaint seems valid on its face until you realize that most people are perfectly okay with fair-skinned Arabs, natives, Hispanics, Indians, and Iranians identifying as people of color. But for some reason, this is not a check Jews are entitled to cash. All in all, by identifying any segment of our ethnicity as white, you are perpetuating an unjust, anti-Semitic construct that precludes us from accessing needed forms of solidarity. And worse yet, hastens our whitewashing and erasure as a people. And this is not something I am willing to countenance. That article that this is taken from is called Ashkenazi Jews Are Still People of Color. Reply to Critics. It was published in the Times of Israel on June 11th, 2017. I love what that person said. It resonates with me. And what I wrote was basically a reflection on the words of not only what this person wrote, but the words of many other people who say similar things. This person is not alone in objecting to the concept of white Jews. I hate that term. I hate it. I despise it. Now, as I said, I do recognize that race is socially constructed, but the question is, how was it socially constructed? It was socially constructed in the United States by slavery and then exported to much of the rest of the world. And so originally, there were only Black people. There was no need for a term for white people. Gradually, as labels developed for other people as well, like Native Americans and Asian Americans and so forth, the need for white or European Americans surfaced. And so now we have a concept of whiteness. And most American Jews, I say most because there are some Black Jews in the US as well, have been incorporated under that category of being white. I am not white. I am not white. Just as my parents growing up were not white. The acceptance of the idea of Jews as being white, as I've said before, began after World War II, when after World War II, Jews had associated with Anglos, with Irish, with Italians, and so on, and realized that they were essentially assimilated into the same subculture. And so it made no sense anymore not to consider Jews, Italians, Irish, and so forth as being white. And for that reason, the term WASP was originated, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, basically a reference to English Jews. No, English white people. The original people who had the name white attached to them. But I don't care. I don't care the fact that there is this label called WASP. That's fine. They can call themselves WASPs if they want. That does not give me a right to call myself white. And in fact, I would go even further. I would say it is an insult to be called white if one is an Ashkenazi or Sephardi Jew. Does that mean I would say so in a conversation with a person? No, of course not. I realize that most people mean no harm. They're simply expressing a common sentiment. But that is what is in my heart. So although, as I said, I recognize all the time, that I benefit from white privilege. I do not get stopped by police because I am seen as white. Here where I am in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, I walk into a store, a restaurant, or any establishment, and I am immediately addressed in English, not in Spanish. And I am called an Anglo. Anglo is only a word. Who cares? But the term Anglo to me means someone of English ancestry, which I am not. I am primarily of Russian ancestry. I have no English ancestry at all, as far as I know. But what they mean is not that. What they mean is that English is my primary language. I am from an English speaking background, which is what they mean by Anglo. I hate being called Anglo. I hate it. Because as this author said, it has the potential to erase Jews and the identities of Jews. Once that happens, once Jews were accepted in American culture as white. Massive numbers of Jews began to intermarry with other so-called white people, like my late uncle, who of course was also an Ashkenazi Jew, married a Roman Catholic woman because it didn't matter anymore. He was white and she was white. In the past, neither one of them would have been seen as being white. But all of that is gone. And now we simply have this concept of whiteness. Now, why has that become a serious problem today in the 21st century? In my opinion, here is why. Because most American Jews are secular. Like, I'm from a secular Jewish background, and what's more, I converted to another religion. And so the fact that I am now considered as being white and not Ashkenazi and not Jewish, not having Jewish ancestry, but just as being white, makes the notion of being Jewish irrelevant. And over the course of generations to come, I assume that there will be no more Jewish people. Does that in itself matter to me? No. I think it matters to that other author that I read, who talks about the erasure of Jews as a people. That is not my concern. My concern is about solidarity with Palestinians. If Palestinians in Gaza are called Palestinians, are regarded as people of color, as brown people, then why am I, as a guy from Jewish ancestry, not regarded as a brown person of color as well? Again, I know people who object to that. They say that by my claiming to be a person of color, I am erasing the discrimination of people who genuinely face discrimination for not being seen as white. I understand that, but I'm not doing that. I am acknowledging the fact that I experience white privilege, but I am also stating that I am, like my Palestinian sisters and brothers, a brown person of color. And it's, to me, not a question of whether I have a right to be seen as a brown person of color. I don't look at it in that way. I'm not sure what right is given to me or rights are given to me by that. To me, the importance of that is shown right now in the Israeli war on Gaza, where most Israeli Jews fit under the category of, again, what is commonly called white Jews. And so you have these white Jews, so-called, in Israel, committing genocide against brown Arabs, Palestinians, when in reality, all of us are brown. I mean, either Palestinians are not brown, and I am not brown, or Palestinians are brown, and I am brown as well. And I think the second alternative is the only one which is realistic right now. Maybe the time will come in the future where race will be a thing of the past. But that time has not yet come. We are living in an age of racism. One thing which I have not seen discussed in the media or in podcasts that much, occasionally, but only once in a while, is that the Israeli war on Gaza is a racist war. Now, calling it genocide, in effect, is acknowledging that. But as an American, I cannot relate to genocide since I have never experienced it directly. Native Americans have, but not American Jews. So it's not something I can relate to. But I can relate to racism. Why? Well, a number of reasons. One, Black Lives Matter has pointed out the extent to which racism still dominates American culture. And second, even though I have not personally experienced it, the rising tide of anti-Semitism in the US. Now, I don't like the term anti-Semitism, especially when it is hyphenated. Unhyphenated, it's simply a designation for something without really referring to the Semitism or Semites. It's simply indicating a name. But the author of this article that I was quoting from hyphenates anti-Semitism. I find that to be unacceptable. Why? Because my Palestinian sisters and brothers are, like me, Semites. What is a Semite? A Semite is someone who comes from a background where a Semitic language was spoken. In my case, it is Hebrew. In the case of the Palestinians, it is Arabic. And as somebody who has studied both Hebrew and Arabic and can read both of them to an extent, not as much as I would like, but to an extent, I can actually pronounce them better than I can read them. But I can still read them a bit. I do not want to be separated from my fellow Semites. I am one with them. The distinction between Palestinians and other Arabs on the one hand, and Ashkenazi and Sephardi Jews on the other, is artificial. and it is nothing but racist. Again, it comes back to the idea of white Jews. I am not a white Jew. Whether I am a Jew is a matter which can be debated because I converted to another religion, but I have no problem being called a Jew. That's fine because my background is Jewish. So why would I care? In fact, I think I should be called a Jew. Now, I realize that the norms regarding labels are variable and that different Jewish movements have different standards for what is and what is not Jewish. So, to an Orthodox Jew, I am still a Jew because my mother was Jewish. Well, in my case, both of my parents were Ashkenazi Jews. But to a Reconstructionist and Reform Jew, I am not a Jew because I converted to another religion. Since I am none of the above, I do not belong to any Jewish movement. As I see it, the choice is mine and mine alone. And I say right here that I define myself as a Jew. Other people can disagree. That is certainly their prerogative. Doesn't bother me. I accept the agency of other individuals. But as a brown person of color, how am I a brown person of color? Because I am a Jew. I am an Ashkenazi Jew. Being Jewish is a kind of ethno-religious construct. What that means is that it's a kind of confusing category because it has both ethnic and religious characteristics. Well, okay, let's go with that. That's true. Roman Catholicism is not exactly an ethno-religious construct. Being a Muslim is not exactly an ethno-religious construct, but being Jewish is, at least now. But if I say that I am Jewish, even from a religious perspective, forget about the ethnicity. I am an ethical monotheist. I learned ethical monotheism in Hebrew school. When I began searching for other religions, the only religions I was attracted to were monotheistic religions because I was and still am an ethical monotheist. So, for example, I was not attracted to Buddhism. Most Buddhists do not believe in a God. Same thing with Jainism. I was attracted to religions which had a belief in a God. So initially, I was attracted to Sikhism. I was then turned off to Sikhism after I realized that the problem I had as a Jew was replicated in Sikhism. My main problem in Judaism was being a liberal Jew. And liberal Jews generally do not believe in the coming of a Messiah. There are, of course, exceptions. But officially, Reform, or as it's called in most places, liberal Judaism, and Reconstructing Judaism, or as it was previously called, Reconstructionist Judaism, believes in a messianic age. And that was not good enough for me. I mean, what's the point of living if revelation is complete? If all I need to do is to read books, in the case of Jews, as a liberal Jew, primarily the Tanakh. Some liberal Jews would accept, to some degree, the Talmud, and some would not. And as a Sikh, it would be accepting only the Guru Granth Sahib. Because, as I said previously, I had a conversation with the head of a Sikh temple back when I lived in Olathe, Kansas. I asked him, what will happen in 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000,000 years? Will there be no subsequent revelation? Will the only revelation be the Guru Granth Sahib? And he said, yes. How could I accept that? I must have known that as a kid, but for some reason it didn't process my autistic brain. And so I was attracted to a religion which had essentially the same problem as I had in liberal Judaism, meaning that revelation was over. There was no more promise of divine revelators. Now, in liberal Judaism, that makes some sense because there's no discussion of anything else except for a Messiah. And you can take the word Messiah, I suppose, if you want, and use it to mean a messianic age. That's none of my business. That people can do whatever they want. But in Sikhism, when you read, as I have, the Guru Granth Sahib, there are discussions of previous avatars. The word avatar is a Sanskrit word which literally translates as descent, and more loosely translates as divine incarnation, incarnation of God. So if there are these discussions of avatars like Krishna in the Guru Granth Sahib in the past, then why can't there be avatars in the future? It's one thing to say that the line of gurus has ended and has been replaced by a book guru. But to say that the line of avatars has ended makes no sense. It's not supported in the Guru Granth Sahib. There's no reference to that. And I have mentioned that to Sikhs, And they have no answer for me. Why? Because there is no answer. There's no answer. It's simply tradition. It's what they believe. I respect people's right to believe whatever they want. It's not my job or my business to tell other people what to believe. And I would never do that. But when it comes to me, just as it made no sense for me to continue as a Reform or Reconstructionist Jew, given the fact that I wanted future revelation, it made no sense for me to become a Sikh for the same reason. So again, why was I attracted to Sikhism? Maybe it was my age. Maybe I didn't know any better. It's hard for me to remember. That's a long time ago. That goes back to when I was 13 and 14 years old. I am now 68. As best I can remember, I simply never thought about it. I was attracted to Sikhism for two reasons. Two reasons. First, it's ethical monotheism, which I learned in Hebrew school. And second, its belief in reincarnation. That's why I liked it, because I too believed in reincarnation. At that time, I did. Not now, but then, yes. So I thought, well, here is a perfect religion for me. And yet it was not perfect at all. And so here I am, back to the beginning of my journey. A brown person, a person of color, who could find no home in Reform or Reconstructing Judaism, who could find no home in Sikhism, but later found a home in another religion, which I will not mention. So I'm grateful for that. But that's not something I will address, at least for the time being, in this podcast. It's irrelevant, and I think it also could be problematic, because the kinds of things I am talking about, Marxism and communism, are not a part of the teachings of my religion. And to the best of my knowledge, most of my co-religionists are not Marxists or communists. So that would, in effect, make me a kind of outcast. And I don't want to be an outcast again. As an autistic, I have been an outcast long enough. Finding another reason for being an outcast is not appealing to me. But once again, I insist that, at least as far as I am concerned, I am a brown person and a person of color. That does not mean I'm trying to erase the discrimination of Black people. When I said that one time to someone, I won't say who, she said to me, "But you're not Black." And I said, "I never said I was Black." All I could think of is that this person did not understand the current usage of the term person of color, which includes both Black and brown people. For a while, the term used for brown people was ethnic people. As a sociologist, that term is problematic because in sociology, we use the word ethnic in a much broader sense to refer to the cultural backgrounds of everyone. So I like the term brown people, and I'm happy to call myself a brown person and a person of color. I would never, ever, 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 and I'm sorry for repeating that 3 times, refer to myself as a white person, as a European American. I would not. I think that would be disingenuous. I think that would be rude. I think that would be cruel. I think that would be disrespectful. And I want no part of that. White people can be white people if they want. I wish they weren't. I wish the label white would go away, to be honest with you. I wish nobody would call themselves white. Given the biography of that word and its ties to the slave system in the US, and then its export around the world, why would anyone say that I am a white person? Which was a way that people of European backgrounds used to exalt themselves, literally exalt themselves over slaves and later freed slaves. I don't understand that. It makes no sense to me. I think the reason, though, is probably simple. I'm most likely overthinking it, which is something I commonly do. It's simply custom. Most people do not carefully think about things like that. They simply do what other people do, what their friends do, their parents did, their other family members do, and so forth. Most people are not critical. I am a critical realist. I have to be critical. I have to be willing to challenge my own assumptions and also to challenge the assumptions of others, whether I say it or not. And usually I do not, at least not to the person's face. If I say it, it's without reference to that particular individual or outside of a conversation with a particular individual. But again, to repeat what I said, please If you ever meet me, do me the courtesy of regarding me as a brown person, a person of color, because there's nothing more that I want at this time in the war against Gaza than to be seen at one with my Palestinian sisters and brothers. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.